I'd like to welcome anybody newer coming back to the Fellowship of AA. Great place to start. I always like to look on people's face when I walk up here with a big book. It's like, oh no. It's to remind me what this is all about, right? And roundups are really, really important. If you kind of, I think the basis of this thing is to remind us the gift and what this is all about, right? It's not about my story. You guys are in for a real treat. Got some phenomenal speakers this weekend, me being one of them. So you guys, and I say that in all humility, right? Because you know what? I represent something greater than me, right? I represent the story of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? What it could do for people like me. There's two groups of people in AA. There are those who represent their own ideas, their own program, right? And for me, sobriety. And then there are those who got sober through a course of action that was outlined by the people that came before us, right? And that's kind of our legacy. That's our responsibility, because there was no AA back then. There's no AA in the future. It's what's happening now, right? And what are we doing carrying this message? What are we doing for the alcoholic who still suffers? What are we doing for the person who's working on membership right now? I mean, just the mere fact that we're sitting in an AA meeting, right, considering where you were sitting not too long ago, and some of you look like you've been here a long time. So there's a couple fire extinguishers at each, no, just joking. So, but it's one of those things that kind of remind me, like on the flight down here, I was kind of, I'd like to thank the committee and everybody that put this together. It takes a lot of work. So usually enjoyed by many, participated in the structure of it by few, right? So if you don't like the way things are going this year, you could volunteer next year. That's the way it goes, right? Simple, right? And we took a big hit over COVID. Good to see everybody and all that stuff. Is really, a real gift to be able to back here, because this is where the juice is, right? One-on-one, right? The transmission of this thing, the kind of, down in the trenches, shoulder to shoulder, right? Where you get in there and you kind of, you forget all about you for a little while when you're talking to a newcomer, right? There's a recipe in Alcoholics Anonymous. And if we don't get back to it or we don't stick to it, then what happens is the new person is the one who don't get this thing, and they're the one who dies of alcoholism. Just because you're sitting in a meeting doesn't mean you got this thing. It's like if I didn't have an airplane ticket and an itinerary, I wouldn't have left Vancouver, right? We had to put a lot of things in place. Right? I could sit in that airport every day for 90 days. Doesn't mean I'm going anywhere, but I could talk like I'm going somewhere, right? Where are you going? I'm going somewhere. Where? I don't know, but and that's kind of like that's the way AA was for me. And I got introduced to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous that I thought was the program in 1978. Right, I got sober in 1989. I got 11 years of in and out. That means sufficient enough reason to come back here, but nothing happened in here sufficient enough to keep me here, which is kind of scary when you think about it, right? Because if the first 100 men and women would have got hold of me, they would have made sure they carried this message to me. They would have made sure before I moved on through any course of action that I understood the basics. Right now, and I never understood any of it. But I have a genius type mind. I'm probably the only one in the room here. I was sober a little while before I realized there's no slogan that says "figure it out," like I thought there was, because they're reading how it works, and I'm wondering how does this work, right? I don't know if you kind of like that, right? We kind of. I think we forget of how damaged we are coming in here under the lash of alcoholism. We think people are going to understand this thing when we talk about it. And this is not where it happened, right? There's nobody going to leave here and go, oh, eureka, I found a recipe, right? It's the one-on-one. It's the kind of carrying of this message that makes the difference. And I think roundups, we need to kind of remind each other what this is about, right? We kind of take a break from our average week or our lives, and we kind of get together, we kind of look around, and we see a lot of familiar faces. But we see a lot of faces that are not here anymore, right? Where do they go, right? And then we see a lot of people who are not involved anymore. We see the same people doing the same thing, right? Thanks, Ed, for the ride here. A lot of you know Ed. I prayed a bit on the plane here, but I really prayed on the road here. Jesus, Jesus, help me now. No, it was kind of like that. So if you're having a hard time connecting with a power greater than yourself, ride with Ed for a little while. Right? And it was great coming here, by the way. We're coming, and it's like we're in the car. We pulled over because we're waiting for someone to follow us. They passed us, and there was a cop following them. It was like the old days, right? Hey, there's a cop following you. Slow down. And we're chasing the cops. It looked really weird, right? So there's a man in front of us, the cops, then us, Ed. Ed was doing 60. Now he's doing 130. Out of my way! I'm holding on to the big book. So, thanks, Ed, for getting me here. I'll need a ride home. No, so I have these squirrel moments, right? So you gotta. So I spent 11 years in and out of the fellowship not knowing what this thing was about because I was trying to figure it out. We give the impression that you should be able to figure this out. We give the impression that we read how it works for the new person. How it works is not for the new person. That's chapter 5. It's for us to remind us.
It's just a little hard to hear, so.
Is that okay? I'm an alcoholic. My name's Tony. I go to 11 anyways, right? You said, my sponsor used to say, the good thing is you get to speak once. After that, it doesn't matter, right? So anyhow, moving right back. And we got great Al-Anon speaker. It's going to be this weekend. You ever hear people say, I wake up with untreated alcoholism every day? You ever hear people say that? Well, they got an Al-Anon meeting tomorrow. You can find how to treat it, right? So one of the things that kind of I missed here was the idea. I'd get bumper sticker sobriety and catchphrase sobriety. I mean, I'd hear something really good at one meeting, I'd share it at the next meeting, and I'd formulate a talk, an AA talk. I'm at home thinking about killing myself. I come to 5 minutes before the meeting, I get the acceptance phase on and surrender. If you want what I got, and here's my number, let's start dating. So it's kind of like I was nuts, but I'm the only one that didn't know I was nuts. Like when you look back, like my cheese and cracker weren't even on the same plate. Like it was totally. But if you asked me, a little bad luck, just a little bad luck. 11 years. So I got introduced to AA, and I knew there was something here. I knew there was something here because I just met my dad, who was 4 years sober. We're living under an alias. I found out what my real name was. He found me through my godmother that we were kind of in hiding from. He found God in the sanitarium for being a danger to himself and the people around me. So he was making amends to me. So my phone, the first time I got introduced to my dad, I was 16. I got this phone call and I'm blasted, like I'm gone. You know what I mean? It's like drinking Boilermakers. I'm involved in little purple things that kind of help you see things differently, and some Thai stick. And this is my 16th birthday, and I'm just kind of way out there. And this guy goes, "Hey, how you doing? I'm looking for this guy." I said, "Yeah, you found him." He says, "Well, do you know any other Tonys?" I said, "Yeah, the phone book's full of them." He says, "Well, I'm your dad." And I didn't know, man, this is good stuff. Whatever I'm doing, it's good. Like I'm tripping. I sit down. And he says to me, he starts using certain language like he thought I would understand what he's talking about. He says, "Hi, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like to meet you and your mom and make amends." Right? And I didn't know what any of that meant. And my mom came home and I said, "Hey, this guy phoned and he said he was my dad." And she says, "We're moving." that was it. We're moving. So because I got 3 stories, I got my story, my mom's story, my dad's story, and kind of our story, right? And I'm just going to stick to my story. I found all the healing that I needed through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was outlined in the big book. I had the pleasure of talking at my dad's eulogy. He died before his 40th anniversary. But he kind of missed this thing. He was sober. He was sober, but I mean, if you ask the people in his household how well he was doing, it wasn't the same talk he was giving at meetings, right? And that seems to be a lot of this thing, right? It's not a presentation of what I'd like you to see. This is who I am, right? I share our experience, strength, and hope. What I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like now. What you come walk in my life, what I share from the podium is exactly how my life is, 100%, right? Maybe a bit of exaggeration, but none of us exaggerate. No, I'm just joking. So I started this process. My first meeting I went to, I heard of this change, because what's really weird It's just prior to that, at 15, I was standing on the 18th story of a building thinking about killing myself. I was on a 3-day drunk involving other things, and I thought, I just got out of a controlled environment, grew up in Toronto, and I thought, if I got to live the rest of my life like this, could you, like when I look at like my daughter when she was 15 and other people at 15, kind of imagine the torment that this person must have been experiencing to think if this is the rest of my life. And I found the magic in alcohol, like at an early age, right? It's not the first drink that kind of caused alcoholism. It was the thought of the second one when it began. I've had many times where I've had a drink and that was it. Like as a kid, drinking Ryan Cokes or wine and stuff like that at the parties in Quebec or wherever. And I never thought of a next one. But I remember the first time I thought of the next drink before I was finished the first drink. And that's when alcoholism started. And that was unbeknownst to me, right? I was still in a controlled environment. I think I was 14. And then I got out of there, got hooked up with some professionals that teach me the ropes. And so, which is really weird is kind of when I was on that balcony, I was having a heart-to-heart with life, God, and myself. And you know, that incomprehensible demoralization. I was looking down at the dumpster thinking it's going to hurt if I hit it half and half. Right? Like I'm having this kind of conversation, right? And then I started, reflecting on my own funeral. I don't know if anybody's ever done that. I'm at my own funeral. I'm on an 18th story of a balcony, kind of, I have 3-day drunk, and I'm kind of wired for sound. And I watch all these people going by and such pretentious. And then my certain aunt went by and says, I knew it, he was never good in. I got resentful at her at a funeral that wasn't happening. And I said, I'll show you. And I didn't jump, right? Because I was resentful at her. So there was an intervention even standing there. As weird as that may sound, that conversation saved my life. That wasn't even happening, right? Fancied or real, right? These things in my mind. But what was the real miracle is shortly afterwards, my dad called me and it introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you kind of look at the lineage or the history of this thing, when Bill went to treatment 3 times, the 3rd time in treatment, he acquired some information that he put into practice, and it was the start of the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. But the 2nd time in treatment, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 2nd time in treatment, and he talked about what he wouldn't do to change his life, right? What he wouldn't do to make amends, right? And he even admitted alcohol was his master, and that in itself was not enough to create a change. And then shortly afterwards, which is really wild, is Ebby called him while Bill was sitting at the kitchen table drinking. Ebby called him, who hadn't experienced too much prior to that because some people came and persuaded the judge to suspend his sentence, and they gave him a couple ideas that created this change. And what's really cool is when he phoned Bill, got on a train and went and met him, when he opened the door, Bill seen there was something different about him. At 2 months sober, nobody was seeing anything different about me different as at 2 months sober, right? I was going around trying to convince everybody how much I've changed. I'm probably the only one here, right? I've really changed, honest. You got a 20? No, so it's like, so it's kind of like, it was always motive kind of built. And he sat at the kitchen table with Bill while he was drinking, which is pretty wild. He sat at the kitchen table with Bill as he was drinking, and he shared his experience, right? And Bill couldn't get past his own thinking. And they talked for about 2 hours. When you think about this, he was talking about his experience for 2 hours, explaining this relationship with this power that created the change, and his ideas of miracles were revised right then and there. But he was still stuck with his thinking, right? And then this is where the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous started happening. He says, why don't you choose your own conception? But that's after he explained the solution, right? And Bill seen it was only a matter of being willing to do what he saw in his friend, that he might get what he got. Made a decision, went to the hospital somewhat shortly afterwards, right? Confirmed his decision and went through a course of action under the guise or under the supervision of his friend. His friend promised when these things were done, he would enter upon a relationship with a power greater than himself that answers all his problems. And that's the transformation that's missing in a lot of places in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? People talk about change, but their actions don't talk about change at all. right? My sponsor used to say, if I couldn't hear what you're saying, would I be able to see what you're saying? A lot of people talk in past tense, what I used to do. This is not a used to do thing. What are you doing? I used to do a lot. Well, you used to be sober too. So it's kind of like, that's a daily reprieve from what? So either you don't understand alcoholism, or you never really did step one of this course of action to keep you sober, or you haven't experienced the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is where I start making friends, right? Because if you did, there's something that we can't fabricate. And that's this thing that happens from the inside out. This is the thing when Bill was lying in the hospital, he thought other people might benefit what was so freely given to him. This is that transition they talk about in the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. This wow moment, right? The story of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I spent 11 years trying to find the story of Alcoholics Anonymous by creating it on my own volition or my own power or my own understanding. Right? Because in all that time, which is kind of weird, I never got 12-stepped into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I can go into 11 years of things like join the Army, join this, join that, join the Baptist Church, join the Nazarene Church, on and on and on. 11 years of good enough reasons, right, to get sober. But nothing sufficient happened enough. So my last relapse, I spent 360 meetings in 90 days. I came out from Toronto. I got a visit from the sergeant that asked maybe it'd be good to relocate. So he says not everybody makes it to the station. I'm not even going to get into all that stuff, right? So it was sufficient enough where I got a private visit from one of the people in one of the divisions in Toronto to maybe relocate. And that time I'm puking green bile and dying of alcoholism. And I'm in and out of AA. My home group, my dry date was in Pencil. I just couldn't get past the voices in my head. Just don't drink no matter what. I'm trying. I seem to be drinking no matter what. Anybody coming back, the whole group would just kind of look at me and just give me that useless advice. Just don't do it. What do you think I've been trying to do? I haven't found that in here, by the way. That's not the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just don't do it. Meeting makers make it, not if you're an alcoholic. Right? Because we lost the message. The message was, we already know you're going to relapse. We already know you're doomed to an alcoholic death if you're of our type. I didn't know what that type was because I was getting information from people who were different than me. Why? Because I was trying to do what they were doing to get sober and it wasn't working for me. And I didn't know that. I remember going to a party once and I said, I'm really nervous. I was sober, I think 3 months or could have been 2 weeks, one of those times in the 11 years I've been and out. I got enough 24-hour trips to start a group. So it was kind of like, so I said, I'm going to this party with my friends and there's a couple girls there I like. I really want to go. And he says, well, just make sure you hang on to a ginger ale or not. Makes sense. And he says, if anybody asks you if you want to drink, just say there wouldn't be enough for both of you. I found a solution to alcoholism. Unbelievable. I went to this party. And I'm walking around, it should be on the 20 questions. I'm holding my drink up thinking everybody in the party should know I'm drinking ginger ale. Normal people don't do that stuff, right? Hey, Tony, you want a beer? Oh, no, if I started, there wouldn't be enough for both of us. And, yeah, we know, Tony, we know. So 11:15 comes around. The guy finishes afternoons. I'm sitting on the couch drinking my ginger ale, hanging onto my glass. Don't let it go, And if you would have asked me, Tony, you think you'd be drinking 15 minutes from now? I would have said, no, look, I made it all night. I got this catchphrase sobriety, which I didn't know was catchphrase sobriety because I thought I could be my own solution if I just stay on guard and stay, diligent on this thing. The guy sits down and goes, hey, what are you drinking? I said, ginger ale. He says, oh, you want a beer? I said, oh, no, if I started, there wouldn't be enough for both of us. He says, I got 5 flats in the back. I guess there would be. So I understand that as the step one promise. Right? Somewhere along the line, I don't know where it changed, probably treatment. Treatment centers changed it, where if I'm paying you to treat me, you better give me information that I like. Right? Because our first big book is the most expensive book we'll ever own. It almost cost us everything we got. The second one's $16. You'll get that somewhere along the line, right? And so I've been to 2 treatment centers. The best in Canada, Donwood Institute. I had a keen, and all, just like the guy, inner workings of my mind, triggers, all this other stuff, but I didn't understand alcoholism. So there, they gave me the impression, if I just watch what I'm doing, don't go to slippery places, I should be my own solution. And that's not the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not. But somewhere along the line it started, well, we can't, the new people, you can't tell them the truth, but you're killing them by lying to them. Right? Like if somebody would have told me the truth, it would have got me. You know what the best part of step 1 is, if you really understand it? It makes step 2 look really good. If you're feeling good about step 1, you haven't done it. Yeah, my mind's got a contract on my ass and left to my own devices. I'm going to die a horrific death. How do you feel about it? Pretty good. That's the truth. Like squirrel. So I'm trying all this stuff. Like the one guy says, "Oh, you lack discipline." I remember sitting over a drink thinking, where would a guy get discipline? I joined the Army. They don't want people like me in the Army. Like that was like, it was a funny time when I look back, right? I got in, I had an afro, a shoulder wide, and I got a leather coat, my dad's biker boots, I got rings on, and I got an attitude like the streets of Toronto. And so I went to, just before one of these camps, recruiting camps, whatever you call it, getting ready for the flight to go to Cornwallis. I got into a fight. I don't remember with who, because they used to say on the 20, you ever suffer from blackouts? I said, I don't remember, right? So I don't know. So I got in a fight with these guys, and I guess somewhere along the line I must have puked on myself and something happened. So I got on this plane, I'm going to boot camp, and they sat me in between a captain and a lieutenant. I didn't know that at the time. And I'm smelling like the night before, but I'm used to the smell. Nobody knows. Like I'm sitting there trying to hide it. And black guy like this, afro like this, and I'm sitting between these two military guys. So where are you going? I said, I think I'm going to this place, boot camp. I said, they're going to love you there. So I got out of there before, and I went to Cyprus, and that's another whole thing, resentment. I loaded up an FNC-1 military assault rifle while I was drunk. It was blanks, but nobody seen any humor in that, and I started firing at the guys I was pissed off at. So they thought maybe not a good idea to go represent Canada in a foreign country. So I got a 4C release, honorable discharge. But that's another story. That didn't work. So I left there, and I'm puking blood by the time I leave there, and I'm starting to go into seizures when I'm not drinking. So my last relapse, 360 meetings in 90 days. This guy named George, and there was a guy by the name of Machine Gun Jerry, probably nobody knows him. But they used to go around the fellowship looking for people who were dying of alcoholism. There's George, Rick, and Steve. And what they'd do, they would assess you based on the questions they asked you in that meeting. Then they would invite you into a home group where they introduced you to the program of recovery, and they took you through a course of action, right? So George went through this course of action, and I used to feel good about looking at George, because when I looked at George, he had a red nose, and he'd shake all the time, psoriasis. I thought, if I ever got that bad, I'm cutting my own hair, I'm unemployable, I'm puking green bile. I hadn't had a good movement in years, right? And I'm thinking, look at that guy, right? I'm just a train wreck, but I can't see myself as I am, because I've conditioned myself not to be able to look in the mirror and not even see me. I was numb to everything and everybody. I conditioned myself because I couldn't change what I was doing, so I changed my view and my opinion and my approach to life, and I became a lone wolf in Alcoholics Anonymous. Imagine that, dying of alcoholism in AA. And I'm not alone. Change the message, change the recipe, change the outcome. How do you know that's happening? Look at the people who are getting involved. Very few people are getting involved because we're changing the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Back when I got sober, you had to go on a wait list to get on the phones and home groups and get on committees. Like, people remember those days? Why? Because they were entrenched in the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now we started worrying about how people feel. Get over it. They're dying. Tell them the truth. So this guy, squirrel, so I'm back again. So George changes. He has this profound change. through going through this course of action. Same like the lineage as everybody that went through this. If you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. It doesn't involve meetings. Meetings help, but meetings won't help you. It may sound kind of weird, but if you're alcoholic, it doesn't matter what you do, absent of a psychic change or spiritual experience, you're doomed to failure. Right? When they said no human power, I didn't know that was including me. I can't be the only genius type mind here. I thought, sure it wasn't Brenda or Kim. I thought they would fix me for sure, but no. Just got them and Al-Anon. You're welcome. I got a couple there. Anyways, Amber knows me for a long time. Some of you think I'm joking. She knew me anyways. So George had this profound change, and he started to do something that saved my life. And this is the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. He didn't ask me permission to start working with me. He just started working with me. By me being in the meeting, I gave him consent, right? Because I would have never picked George as my sponsor. I would have never picked him as somebody who's going to help me. He would start coming up to me and say, how you doing? I said, good. He says, when are you coming to this big book study workshop we're doing? I said, oh, no. I know what not to do now, because people say that who don't understand alcoholism. I'm never drinking again. You don't understand alcoholism. See, when you make those statements, the obsession has left. I don't think about it no more. I'm okay. You don't understand alcoholism. You haven't done step one yet. I know I'm making friends. Because if you could see, feel, and touch it, that's not step one. Step one is an illness. It's a phantom. It's something that works within the mind that I can't see happening. And when it's happening, I'm drinking. Right? Bill was the first person that kind of made reverence. Was I crazy? Somebody pushed a drink my way. Was I crazy? I began to wonder. His lack of inability to keep himself sober no matter what the necessity or the wish. He's one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. He tried to get sober for 5 years. 5 years till somebody carried a message to him sufficient enough for him to have an experience, and he learned a recipe and he started working with other people. And it was such a profound message that the doctor seen this that allowed him to start working in his facility with other patients of his type that were beyond human aid, that were of the hopeless variety. So George started working with me, and I'd have these bumper sticker catchphrase sayings, and I'd feel really good. Soother sobriety, I call it. Give me a false sense of that I got it this time. He'd walk up to me and says, oh, that sounds great. And first time I puffed my chest up. He says, what does it mean? So what do you mean, what does it mean? Weren't you listening? He says, oh, no, I heard what you said. He says, what does it mean? He says, let's start with the basics. He says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. What are they talking about? I showed him the directory and I said 90 meetings in 90 days. Because I thought the fellowship was the program. And if I just sit in meetings, I'll be able to gather my program of recovery sufficient enough for me to recover. Nowhere in 11 years did my brain says, hey, Tony. I went, what? Maybe you're not getting this thing. Right? Because each time I was getting it. Each time, based on my understanding, it was going to be different. Of course it would be different because I never understood alcoholism. So George seen I was dying. Make a long story short, he goes, we're starting a new group. He says, do you mind coming and giving us a hand? So I went to the guy who was teaching me about the traditions in AA, and you can't throw chairs around, you can't grab people by the throat, you got to be nice, you can't heckle people when they're speaking at meetings. You can't do none of that. He says, it's not a bar. I said, I don't know if I like this place. No, so anyways. And I learned how to conduct myself in AA meetings. Like, I wasn't getting invited nowhere. Like, home group, coffees, nothing. I found out from my home group that I was trying to get sober from 87 to 89, that they used to go for coffee after the meeting. I found out by a newcomer. He says, hey, Tony, you coming for coffee? I said, I've been coming here 1.5 years. He says, yeah, we go every week. So I went and I got barred from the restaurant. So it was kind of, so I'm living in AA. And so George says, when are you coming help us out? I went and seen Chuck, and I said, Chuck, see, these guys want me to go help them through the steps. Now, mind you, I'm in 4, 12, and 12 studies. I'm running one. I'm talking about Bill's experience, hoping that it's going to be my experience, but I never did the work to get Bill's experience. I'm sitting around talking about Bill's experience. The 12 and 12 is not the steps of recovery. I didn't know that, but I got taught that. So George says, when are you coming help us out? So I said, okay, I'll be there. talked to my sponsor. I went to this meeting. I went with the 12 and 12. I opened the door. Judy was there. She was a member of Al-Anon, and her eyes were huge. I thought, wow, something weird with that woman. Like her eyes were bug-eyed when she seen me at her door, like I knew her address, right? She was really worried and concerned because about 6 months prior to that, I got in a fight with a couple of guys in the meeting. Before the meeting, we were arguing about something, probably a girl. So she came out and she goes, "What are you guys doing?" I says, "We're having a discussion." She says, "We have a meeting going on over there." So what kind of meeting? She says, "Al-Anon." I said, "What's that?" She goes, "You three knew?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I don't got the time to explain it 3 times," and turn around and laugh. No. I thought, what a weird woman. So I went to this, knocked on the door. She opened it. It was like, I thought, she talks funny too. So I went in, and God bless Al-Anon. That woman learned to love me because she loved her husband, and she knew her husband's sobriety and his lifeline was dependent on him carrying the message. She wasn't thrilled on the idea of who, but George fixated on me. They told him to go find the sickest guy he knew, and that guy was out of town, so he started working with me. And I used to think, what's this guy's problem? I used to like George until when I started realizing, he knows something that I don't want people to know, that I don't know. That's why newcomers like hanging around with newcomers. You guys sharing, go, "Oh, that was great, that was great." And the old timers go, "What the hell are you people talking about," right? That was me. So they started, for the first time in 11 years, as weird as this may sound, they introduced me to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. First time in 11 years, thousands of meetings. I started going through this thing, and something started to happen. One, I seen the hopelessness of my situation. They explained alcoholism, the malady that precedes the first drink that people don't talk about, it, which is on page 23, is the second symptom in alcoholism that places us beyond human aid. So how should we help the reader to determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? That determines whether you're one of us or not. And by the time I got to page 44, my sponsor sat me down. He says, the first paragraph on page 44 in We Agnostics says, "In the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and non-alcoholic." He asked me to explain that to him, right? And to go through the book and to back up the points that we're talking about. The same way the two guys, when they revisit that guy who thought he had a problem, admitting you have a problem in step 1 is 2 different things. A lot of people in AA admit they have a problem, but they haven't done step 1 yet, right? And that guy on page 40, if you want to look at it later, it's an amazing story because he was convinced that he would never drink again. Anybody who's convinced of that hasn't done step 1, or step 1 doesn't apply to you. Because if you're convinced of that, then you really don't know our solution, do you? You could be your own solution. But if you're convinced without a shadow of a doubt that you're in a collision course with another drink, that you're beyond human aid, then the solution makes sense of the idea that I need to obtain a psychic change or spiritual experience. We Agnostics is actually the introduction to step 3. Right? And by the time I got to step 3, what happened for me is I understood alcoholism from their point of view. I understood the solution from their point of view, and I was able to choose my own conception, which is the formulating of an idea and a direction. That's what conception means based on what they were talking about. Whenever he was talking to Bill, Bill formulated his ideas based on what he was hearing, on the idea if he obtained the same solution that his friend did, he could have the same experience. That's the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. They put it in here. And by the time I got to step 3, they said it was an idea. Step 3 was an idea, because if I was able to experience the transformation as outlined or people talk about, then I wouldn't need to do the rest of the steps. If I was able to formulate a relationship with a power greater than myself, in step 3 it'd be a 3-step program. Right? Step 3 is an idea. Do I want to continue on this course of action? Right? Because I have 2 alternatives: go on to the bitter end or accept some spiritual help, which is outlined through the rest of the course of action. So step 2 is really the course of action laid out by those that went before me. Step 3 is my decision to carry through it. So the confirmation of step 1 is another drink. The confirmation of the idea, step 2, is step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. The idea of this relationship in step 3 that would be possible through a course of action is step 11, right? I don't mean to piss off nobody, but I tend to do this. My story, my experience, this is how I look at it. I don't do 10, 11, and 12 every day. I do 11. It's the only step in our manual that's operating on a 24-hour clock. It's the only step that talks about removing the barriers, right? Because if I was really doing all the steps, then I wouldn't have a problem in 10 if I'm doing 11, would I? If I was doing it every day. And if I was doing it every day, step 12 covers all the steps. Step 12 is about carrying this message. So I formulated this relationship with a power greater than myself was sufficient enough for me to start doing my amends. And as I started to do my amends, that's where this thing started showing up of my personal experience with what you people were talking about. And as I started to do this thing, unbelievable things started, coincidences started to happen, or these things that started to happen that were unexplainable, profound things that kind of shook my foundation. But what's really weird is I forget those things. That's why we do a recipe. It's a daily recipe, right? That's why after step 7, it goes right into 11. When we retire at night, upon awakening, it gives me the spiritual correction I need to do, not to be repeating the same problems and pitfalls of the past. Right? I learned the recipe that Bill W. learned is not to work on myself. It's the shifting from me to something greater than me. And when I get stuck on self, go help somebody else. That's the recipe. What worked is a way of life that worked in rough going. And that's the recipe I learned. And so one of the amends I made, I had to go to Quebec, so I took a bus from Vancouver. It's 4 days on the bus. I talked to some members about their experience, strength, and hope. Right, because I couldn't fly that because I still had warrants. That's another thing. Anyway, So I had to go so the amends I took care of were the ones I prayed about, and they came to my consciousness. They were the ones that showed up in my life. I didn't make a decision to do all those things. They came up in my meditation. Our people just started showing up, and I had a plan based on my conversation with my sponsor and the outlay that's in step 9. That's why it says this thought brings us to step 10, not these groups of actions. Right? And the promises talk about by the time we're halfway through what? This process. The spiritual appendix in the back of the book says what usually takes place in a few months could hardly be brought about by years of self-discipline. So when they talk about in step 10, which is an outlay of this whole thing, the only 2 paragraphs, less than half a paragraph talks about you. The rest is all about your relationship with a power greater than yourself. And formulating that, and make sure you maintain it and develop it, because what we have is a daily reprieve. Daily reprieve from what? By this time, the problem has been removed. Halfway through your 9th, somewhere along the line, the problem gets removed and you don't know when it happens. And you don't know when it comes back. So our reliance is on something greater than us, right? Because I've been coming in AA up to 45 years. I've been sober as the result of this recipe outlined in this book through the guidance of another member, right, for over 33 years. That's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the story. When you open this book, one of the first things it says, the story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered. Most of us think the most important part is the recovery part. No, it's the story. The story. Look at my life before this thing got a hold of me. And once this thing got a hold of me, I wasn't the same. They took me through that course of action. The first thing I did was start a big book study. From the home into a meeting. And it was a Yabat BYOB meeting, Friday night at the Burnaby Fellowship. Started 32 years ago. I think it's still going. I've been involved in big book study workshops ever since. The recipe, working with new people. We had one of the biggest, before COVID, had one of the biggest workshops in Canada. Pretty amazing, the transformations that I've watched happen in other people's lives as those watched in my life. So I'm on this bus and I got to go see these people. They told me to sit up front. I'm talking to God. There's a contract on page 63, right, with this thing between me and my Creator. It says, if I'm willing to perform His work well, He'll take care of everything I need, not what I want, to be able to face life on life's terms, right? So I'm on this bus. I'm listening to cassettes. The Grapevine, the Grapevine reps here, great literature. They had it on cassettes back then. I'm listening to that. Meeting on the go, and I'm sitting in the front of the bus, and I'm on the last part of the bus trip. Everywhere I stopped, asked if there was any friends of Bill W. Nobody's showing up, so it's me and God. and what I learned here and going back to the recipe. So I'm sitting there, and the closer I get, the more anxiety I'm having. And now I'm arguing with God. Nobody ever argue with God here? And I'm sitting there in this seat going, hey, pal, you dropped the ball, man. I'm not feeling it. That's how I used to talk to God. He's okay with that. It's like, a little kid talking to an adult. Right? So as I'm not feeling this, you said you'd look after me. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You're dropping the ball here. I'm not feeling this. And this lady beside me goes, you okay? I said, yeah. I had to take off my headphones. I said, yeah. She said, what's going on? I said, I got to go visit these people. I'm doing this thing like an amends. She goes, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for the last 20 years. I look out, funny guy. And that's how it's, when they talk about the solution, they call it a phenomenon. It's unexplainable events. And us being here is really an unexplainable event for people like us. Because just think of the pain of the people that would endure around us, the kids, the parents, right, the employers. How many people's lives we more than touched, we devastated. And then it got to a place where we were devastated without hope and without any kind of direction. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous looking for a solution. The solution's outlined in here. If your sponsor doesn't have you in this, get another sponsor. It's the first thing they should introduce you to. If you got a sponsor that's asking you to read page 417, get another sponsor. Right? Because if you're able to fix you with you and doing catchphrase and frothy emotional appeal and all that other stuff, then you would have changed a long time ago. What you need to find out is, why do I keep on doing what I'm doing in spite of this thing? Right? Why? Right? And this book will answer that. By the time you get to page 44, you'll know that. And if you can't explain it, you're not going to be here long. If you don't know what your problem is, I already know you're not staying. The only one that don't know they're staying is you. You know how many people are not here anymore that thought they'd be here forever? I know some of you are arguing in your mind right now. But I could show you what I'm talking about. You can't show me what you're talking about. You're having a one-sided argument with you. I'm talking about the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Right? When these guys came and visited this guy who relapsed after having this kind of conversation with him, and he relapsed again, then they took him through step 1 again. And with the conviction that he couldn't do the job himself, then they introduced him to step 2. So as I started going through this thing, I started having this relationship with a power greater than myself, and really profound things started to happen. Because what am I doing is, I'm now waking up with the idea of representing my own ideas. I wake up in the morning and ask how I could be of service. What do I got to do? 33 years sober, I still do 3 big book study workshops a week. I still have a home group. I'm involved in that home group. I vote in that home group. Right? And I still go to other meetings where I'm active. When my phone rings, I answer it. I make myself available. I go out with a woman that's a normie. God bless her. We all have our problems. So she's a normal drinker. I don't understand her at all. Not at all. I used to think she did stuff to bother me, right? But no, that's just the way they are. They're weirdos. They're weird. They're weird. I remember, I think we were married 4 years, and she goes, hey, you know a lot about alcoholism? I said, yeah. Like, yeah. She goes, does wine go bad? I went, I don't know. And then I said, what does it matter? She says, what's the matter with you? I said, like, after a couple drinks with the vinegar, it's all the same, right? Some of you know what I'm talking about. I'm drinking stuff, other people go, what? Anyways, another thing she did, which is kind of weird, you ever hear this thing of pairing? Pairing? I thought pairing meant, okay, we'll do the tequila with the hash and with a bit of methamphetamine. I thought that was pairing. We're going to a concert. Oh, yeah, a couple of hits of Purple Microdot, do some tea, grab a 40. Yeah. I thought that was pairing. She says, no wine with cheese. Oh, what the hell are you talking about? So, and fish and meats. So I thought, I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I got myself into? No, so I'm joking. So she's an amazing woman I've met through the recipe in the inventory. That's another thing. There's an inventory there on our future sex lives, and inviting the relationship or creating the relationship we desire. It's also in the 4th step that a lot of people miss. That's how I met my wife when I was 16 years sober. through enough pain, I went back to the book and it showed me that recipe where I invited God into it and I met her. That's a whole different story. But I go to the fridge one day and I go, hey, what's this? She goes, what's what? You know. She's in the living room. You know what's what. She goes, no, I don't know. In the fridge. She goes, what about the fridge? She's trying to figure out what I'm looking at. I'm looking at a glass of wine with cellophane on top of it. What's that? She goes, what? I said, look, there's only that much in there. She goes, yeah, I wanted to save it today. I was having some steak. I said, what's the matter with you? And I walked away. Like, that's crazy, right? Like, I caught her. She's a problem drinker. I know she is. I walked into the kitchen one day and she's pouring it back into the bottle. So what are you doing? She said, I poured too much. I just go like this now. I just shake my head, walk away, right? She does shit like that, right? So, she's absolutely fantastic. She supports what I do in Alcoholics Anonymous because she's witnessed the miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous. She's witnessed the tragedies that happen here and the people I've worked with who are no longer here, their kids, the memorials I go to, and the pain that goes deep. The only problem with getting sober for a while is you start living from the inside out. We were talking about that over dinner. Like, I'm turning into a big sap. Like, and I'm okay with it. I did a men's retreat Roundup this weekend. And you want to make a man uncomfortable, start crying. They're like, oh my God. They're all freaked out, right? And then because of gratitude, imagine that, being so grateful for your life in Alcoholics Anonymous that you can't contain it. Comes from the inside out. And that's what's available here. And you know what's also available here is that the promises are available for everybody around you. If you're the first one experiencing them in your life, you're not experiencing them. When the people around you start having a new freedom and new happiness, and when you show up at the door and you put the key in it, does everybody have anxiety inside that door? Like my dad, he was sober, he missed the whole boat. He found religion, he found Christ, and when he came to meetings, he was like helping in the community, but he lost it in his own home. Right? I had a pair of shoes in the front door, a pair of shoes in the back door. He was a very violent man. He was cruel and abusive to his kids and to the dogs. Like he was just a really hateful man. But I loved him. And I talked at it as his eulogy. He got me to speak, and he died a horrific throat cancer, a really bad death, and I stayed with him for a week, and I nursed him, and I looked after him. And at his eulogy, you know what I was able to say? I was proud to know him. Because he introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous. And Alcoholics Anonymous introduced me to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that's in here. Somebody took the time out of their life when they could have been watching TV, when they could have been missing their home group, right? But you know what a home group is? People are going looking for you. They're coming. They're going to know you're there. And if you're not there because you find other things to do, pretty soon you find other things to do. There's no coasters in AA. The only coasters you'll find is under a drink. Right? A daily reprieve is a daily reprieve. And one of the things where they talk about here, most good ideas are simple. He is the father, we're his children. Right? He is the director, we're his agents. And when you pray for how to be of service, be prepared for some remarkable things that happen that are unexplainable. Because what you're doing is asking for guidance. And when that guidance comes is in the moment. If you don't listen to that voice, then there's somebody making a call right now. And God says, I hear you. I'm going to send one of my guys or one of my girls. I'm going to send somebody right now. They don't know that they're going there to meet you. But I'm going to hook these two up. Right? Because they're going to listen and they're going to show up. Bill had no idea what was about to happen to him. No idea whatsoever. Most of us have no idea whatsoever. I was working in the film industry and I got this call for a day call. I don't usually take day calls. And it says, no, you got to go out for a day call. Something said, go take the call. So I go to this day call. On the other side, I walk into this factory and there's a guy sitting on a big thing of plywood. And he's sitting there. And I can't see him. He can't see me. And there's nobody else in the place. I open the door and it's dark and it's just a couple lights on. The closer I get to him, he goes, are you kidding me? I said, what? He says, I've been asking God for help. I've been sitting here asking what I'm going to do. And of all the people in the world to show up, you show up. Surprise! No. And we had a great time. He's still sober. There's another guy. He was sitting on the balcony, standing on the balcony, smoking a cigarette, and the empties were piled. His fingers were yellow, and he was having a moment like Bill did, and we all do. You know that moment where, how did I get here? I can't see no way out. And so what's funny about that is, I had my sponsee phone me in the morning. He says, hey, I got a call. He's a window cleaner. He says, I got a call 10 minutes from my place. Yeah, life is great. Then he phoned me back 5 minutes later. He says, hey, you can't believe that. I got to go half an hour to this new job. I said, oh, so much for God, eh? When it's going your way, God's fantastic. Now that's inconvenient, it's a big problem. So he's cleaning these windows, and he bungee cords in on this guy on the balcony, hits him, he falls into the empties. How does that happen? One guy made a call, the other guy answered it. Right? And the only way he made that call is because he has the connection. Obviously, you can't transmit something you don't got. See to it that your own house is in order. We have a recipe that connects us to the realm of the Spirit. They talk about the fellowship that we come in here, and then they talk about the fellowship of the Spirit. And I'll close. I've got a lot of unbelievable stories. I don't know why I'm going with this one. So I'm in Hawaii, and I want to go to a meeting. You know how we go to a new place, want to go to a meeting. Right? I want to go to a meeting, talk about how great I am. How great this is, right? So, sorry, had a moment there. So we go to this meeting, I'm out of town, and I want to. And I read it wrong. It was 7 a.m., not 7 p.m. And they saw everything's 2 miles in Hawaii, right? It's like from here to where my hotel room is. And it took 20 minutes to get here. Anyways, I go back. My wife, I said 7 a.m. So next morning I set the alarm clock and I go back for a 7 a.m. meeting. I get there and I had the hitchhike. I had the jog. I had to. There was no buses around. I thought, weird place, weird island. So I get there, there's nobody there. I say, hey, the guy walks by, he says, hey, you here for the meeting? I said, yeah. He says, no meetings on holidays here. so I get back to the hotel. I go upstairs, I grab a Cuban cigar. I love cigars. So I grab a cigar, and my wife goes, what are you doing? I said, I don't know what's going on. God has something going on. I'm just going to go over there under the palm tree on the nice grass, smoke the cigar, and ask God what's going on, what's up. Right? So all those elements that I think are not working in my favor has me in a condition where I go grab a cigar. I go downstairs, something says, go over there to the breakwater. I look over there's nothing appealing. It's all lava rock and it's all breakwater and there's a high wall, nothing appealing. There's a palm tree over there with nice grass. I'm talking to God this way. I don't know if anybody does that. I said, I don't want to go over there. He says, I never asked you what you wanted to do. He says, go over there. I said, okay, I'll go over there. So I go over there because I'm spiritual now, right? And so I go, damn it. 28 years sober, I'm spiritual. So I go over there, I'm sitting there and trying to get, right? And there's this guy from here to the back wall sitting on a breakwater. And his arms are just going like this. Now it's 10:30 in the morning. His arms are going all over the place. And I think, wow, what's going on with him? He gets up, walks by me, which is really wild. And he says, hey, you want a snow cone? A snow cone? At this hour? He says, no, a beer. I said, no, I don't drink. He didn't even listen. As soon as I said no, he kept on walking. And the beers were in the sand. That's kind of weird. If you're a professional, they're right beside you. So why he would do that? Another element that he'd have to come by and talk to me. And so he went by me again, and he stopped. And he looked at me. He says, I don't know why I'm talking to you. He says, I live on the other side of the island. He says, something told me to come here. He says, I was down there talking to God. I said, I knew you were talking to somebody, right? I figured God the way you were giving him the finger, right? So, and he says, yeah. He says, my wife just left me. He says, my life has fallen apart. He says, I was 8 years sober. He says, I was asking God why he abandoned me. I said, allow me to introduce myself. I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. God arranged a trip from Vancouver for me to come and sit here to let you know that he hasn't abandoned you. That we have a course of action available to allow you to experience a new freedom and a new happiness, a usefulness beyond anything you could ever imagine, comprehension of the word serenity and peace, and the usefulness to see how your experience can benefit others. This is the great news this book carries. And if your meetings and your AA isn't happening the way you want it to, it's because you're not carrying this message. Somebody's dropping the ball. Because see, when George got carried this message, something lit up from the inside out he couldn't hide or contain. And when they carried this message to me, something lit up in the inside I couldn't hide or contain. That's the 12th step, having an awakening, right? And I'll close with this last thing is gratitude is something that is seen, it's not heard. What are you doing? So in other words, they use the passage in the book of a shipwreck. They use that kind of, and that in itself is not enough to keep us joined the way we are joined now. What we have is a common solution, right? A common language that's contained in here. That we all agree on it. Who agrees on it? Everybody that's done it. All our members, with a few exceptions, all our members have tapped into an inner resource of strength that they come to rely on, this daily reprieve. And so what happens is there's two ways of dying from drowning. You could actually drown again after, when you go home alone in your bed. You could actually drown from the water that you obtain. And the other one is hypothermia when you're out of the boat. I have my level 3 first aid, how can you tell? So when you get out of the water, it's not over yet. Well, one is exposure, the other is hypothermia. Just because you're in a meeting doesn't mean you're out of the water. You still have the ailment. It's lying dormant. You can't see, feel, and touch it. It's alcoholism. It has us. We don't have it. It's not a behavioral problem. And so when you go and get treatment for this thing and you come out of the treatment room, there's two things you can do with that. Those who are grateful will grab a handful of life jackets, get back into the boat because they know people are dying. And then there are people who go watch TV and tell everybody else how grateful they are. By the look of this room, there's a lot of grateful people. Right? You're really involved, you're here, you're making this happen. This is the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is what Roundups are all about. It's the reminder, the rejuvenating, the charging up, right? Because we are Alcoholics Anonymous, right? There's people working on membership right now. There's people around you in Alcoholics Anonymous who are dying of alcoholism. By you ignoring them and not carrying this message is participating in their death, right? So, what saved my life was two responsible members of Alcoholics Anonymous introduced me to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous outlined in here. My family, my mom, my kids, and everybody that knows me and myself, I'd like to thank you for the beautiful gift you gave me. May God bless you and keep you safe.